Hi, my name is Mark and welcome to the channel. Today I'll be taking you with me to Lindisfarne, the holy island located off of the northern coast of England. If you are brand new to the channel, you can check out last week's video for a bit of context of where I am in the world and what's going on, and if you've already seen that, then let's jump into today's video. Today's video will be a little bit about this special trip that we were able to take to Lindisfarne and a good bit of knitting. So stick around if you've been waiting for the knitting. Here we are at the ruins of the priory and the church that still stands, where services are still held here on Lindisfarne. And Lindisfarne is truly an island, a tidal island off the northeast coast of England. And to get there, we rode on a bus, and the causeway we took is only accessible twice per day according to the tides. So there are lots of warning signs that explain to you that as you're coming onto the island, and if you plan to leave the island either by foot or car, you have to be very careful of the times because you can easily get stuck. And they have some safety procedures in place with places you can stay if you are crossing just at the wrong time, but otherwise they do sort of rescue missions. You can be rescued by boat or you can be rescued by, I think, helicopter. And I was reading about how much both of those things cost, and they're extremely expensive, as you can imagine. So fortunately, we were part of a tour group on a bus. Our bus driver knew the route well. We went at the appropriate times and left at the appropriate time. But this footage should give you an idea of how isolated the island can feel. So let's take flight and look a bit more at the town, at Lindisfarne. I think of the most recent census from 2020, they reported something like 300 people who live here. And there are a few restaurants, a post office, a few shops run by the National Trust, and a school. And I think the school runs through primary school, through grade 5, year 5, something like that. And then the children go to boarding school somewhere off the island. So a big draw to this place is its history. There's recorded history from the 6th century AD, and this was a very important place of Celtic Christianity. So in the museum, something you might be interested in seeing is an example, a very early example of knitted fabric. There are several examples here, but two types. The first we'll zoom in on is a woven fabric. And then the second example we'll see is a knitted fabric. And the signs here really didn't give the best indication of what this was, so we'll get to that in a second. But if you look closely, you'll see the stockinette texture of the fabric, and you'll notice increases or decreases depending on which direction this was being knitted. So here's the sign there, and it doesn't give us maybe the best or most specific information. Felted and woven cloth, 18th century. Fragments of felted wool fabric made by matting and compressing loose wool fibers. So maybe the woven example is what they're describing, but it doesn't say anything about the knitted example. So on the website for the National Trust, there was a little more clarity for the knitted example. So we'll read that here. Dating from 1720 to 1750, made of wool, and these remains of a fashioned knitted jerkin or jacket, possibly of Dutch or Flemish origin, represent some of the earliest known examples of knitting. The wool, now light sandy brown, was perhaps originally white or natural colored. It's a 2-ply S spun and then Z plied, so for spinners out there, this makes sense to you. doesn't make as much sense to me, but I kind of know what's going on. So the ply is plied so lightly that the two threads often lie side by side. The cloth is used and worn, and therefore may have been recycled, intended for use as gun wadding. And we'll take one more close look at that knitted example, which was very cool to see. And amazing that this is preserved in the remains. Then on my way through the gift shop, I saw this adorable mug, which would have come home with me, but I'm here on a long trip and I'm worried about getting it home in one piece. So maybe it'll be something I buy myself online in the future. So as we transition to knitting, I discovered this beautiful bench facing out at the castle, facing the castle, facing the water, surrounding me with these boats. And one of my favorite things about setting up shop and knitting is that I meet a lot of sweet dogs. So you'll see here I have a dog friend who I was glad to meet. I'm always excited. I hope that they'll want to visit, but normally they're just looking for treats and then they move on their way. But I was really happy to find such a beautiful place that seemed poised perfectly for a whole day of crafting. I think if I were staying on Lindisfarne for a vacation, a trip, this is where I would want to be. I would want to find a bench by the water where I can people watch, where I can see what's going on, and I can really peacefully knit or crochet or work on my project. So I was so thrilled to find this. I abandoned my husband Ned and my mom for a bit, for about 15-20 minutes, so that I could enjoy some knitting. I'm working on the color work here of the Kerr Sweater by Rebecca Clow, and I always give myself goals. If you've been here on the channel before, you've heard me talk about my knitting goals and what pushes me to get through sections of a pattern. And at this point in the pattern, I think I was 5 or 6 rows away from the end of my color work for the body of the sweater, which I think was a big benchmark, something worth celebrating. So that was my goal here, to get a little bit of it done. And I think this day of the trip, I knew I would have time between free time on the island and our bus ride home to get the color work done. And if you watched last week's video, you'll know that I have some mistakes in the color work. So as I'm holding the sweater up, as I'm doing this, see if you can catch any of those mistakes if you'd like to, or you can ignore them. As people have suggested, I'll definitely go through and I'll do a little bit of duplicate stitch. It's nothing big enough for me to go back in time, but I think I'll tidy things up with duplicate stitch, and then those mistakes will be so discreet, truly, no one will know, except for anyone who ever watches these videos. But to the naked eye, it's not going to be noticeable. You're not going to know where it is. And that's a good solution. So this is my heaven. This is such a wonderful thing for me to get to do. This is my favorite thing to do, to find a place, ideally a picturesque, beautiful place, a comfortable place to sit and knit. I don't feel like I'm trapped up at home. I'm out in nature, feeling the breeze. Maybe I get sprinkled on, maybe it rains, and hopefully I can people watch. So this to me is absolute bliss, and not everybody loves this style of video of seeing the knitting go by, but I thought I'd pair it with a little bit of narration like I'm doing here, and I'm going to plug in a little bit of music that I think fits the vibe and leave you to a bit of that. So you can skip along, you can look at the timestamps if that makes you happier to scoot to other parts of the video with stories and the sound of my voice, or if you're someone who doesn't love the sound of my voice, here's your moment to shine. Here's a break for you. So I'm going to plug in a little bit of music for the rest of this blissful knitting time. And thus ends my knitting time for this stop. There's more to come later in the video, but part 1 complete. So my project goes away and it's time for lunch. We went to one of the pubs here on the island and we had a really great lunch. We ended up sitting outside. The weather was all over the place. We had cloudy weather, sunny weather, and rain all in one day, all for brief periods. So here I am knitting, enjoying a little more work at lunch, maybe to the chagrin of my companions, but I like to say we win some and we don't. And I'm trying to knit more. I'm trying to make sure I'm knitting as I go about. I always say no time is a bad time for knitting time. So here are a couple pictures as we wrap our way back around, and we're making our way along the beach towards the castle, where I find a very opportune place. Another nice bench here with a different view, and things get a little sunnier this time. So I'll stop talking so you can hear a little crunch as I walk through the grass here. And I wanted to make sure to show you the view. Here's the castle, the same one from before, but now I'm wrapping around on another part of the beach, and I'm sat among all of these flowers popping up, which are beautiful. And again, this is just like the nicest thing I can imagine, to be somewhere where you feel like time stands still and you get to work on something that makes you happy, that makes your brain feel good and your hands and your heart feel good. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to sit and knit a bit more. I'll tell you a little bit more about the trip as we're here. This was an important visit for our group, our tour group that was singing in Durham, because of the people that lived and preached and thought here on the island. So Lindisfarne was the home of St. Cuthbert, and St. Cuthbert is buried, the shrine of St. Cuthbert is at Durham Cathedral. So part of our sort of pilgrimage as a cathedral choir, as a church choir, was to connect with those people that were important and memorialized, honored in these spaces, which is one of the most unique things about going to England from the United States. The scope, the span of the history, of course, is quite different. So as an American, we get very excited about visible, tangible history, where we can see streets, buildings, books, fabric, whatever it is, that carry hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of years of history. So it felt like a very meaningful day to be here on Lindisfarne, because we had been mindful of the work of St. Cuthbert, and we had taken a tour in Durham to see all of the nods to the work of a saint, and he's included in the prayers. And I mean, there are so many ways that all of this plays into the way people honor history, and sort of history is living. History lives on through these rituals and acts. So the whole day felt like a very special opportunity. And then for me to pair that with something that I feel represents so much of who I am was even more special. While I'm talking to you, while we're gathered here together, I'll share a little bit more about some of the landmarks you've seen in the video before giving you a more peace and quiet. Another break from my voice if you are into ASMR, if you're into the sounds of nature or a little bit of music during knitting. So before I cut to that, some of the other buildings, some of the other sites you've seen in the video, one of the first things I showed was the ruins of the priory. So this was originally a monastery, which was destroyed during a Viking invasion. and then reestablished as a priory following the Norman conquest of England. And there's an interesting relic of this, a piece of stone with a carving showing the monks carrying their most important holy relics to safety, and on the reverse side, the Vikings coming in, invading the monastery, which is interesting. The church that you saw towards the beginning of the video, St. Mary the Virgin Parish Church, which I mentioned is still an active parish, was originally built in 635 AD and then restored in 1860. And you'll see a little bit of the inside of that. Towards the end of the video, our choir attended a Eucharist service and sang and worshiped in the space to kind of cap off, again, this pilgrimage that we experienced. And then the castle that you saw in the first knitting clip, and as I panned around from this bench, is both old and new. It is a historic castle, but with the raids, with the invasions that happened in history, it changed hands and parts were demolished and rebuilt, and much of it was rebuilt and redone in 1901. So it's less of an example of history, but from the outside is something really special and beautiful as part of the landscape here. So, as promised, I'll leave you again for some sounds of nature, some sounds of knitting, and maybe another bit of what I think is appropriate music for this setting. And then I'll see you again for a little bit of the service, close-up of the beach here on Lindisfarne, and my final thoughts of this special trip I was able to enjoy. And here is my march down to another beach. Now we are behind St. Mary's Parish Church, panning around to show you. There's the church, and then just behind it, this beautiful bit of beach and landscape. And as I mentioned, our day finished with a Eucharist service at the parish church, which was meaningful whether or not the people partaking are religious. Being surrounded by this tangible history, walking this history, resonates so strongly. And again, as Americans, this is so moving to so many of us because we don't have the same kind of visible history in our day-to-day lives back in the States. So if you're watching me from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, it's not necessarily going to make the same sense. But if you're watching me from the United States, you'll probably understand exactly what I mean by being so moved by that history. And in our final look around Lindisfarne, let's bring it back to what's really important here. And that's what makes the whole fiber world go round. That's our sheep. I was glad to see a few sheep here on Lindisfarne. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this video. I hope that there was something here that you enjoyed. As always, let me know in the comments what resonates with you, what questions you might have, and what you'd like to see more of in future videos. If you've been here for this video, if you've been on the channel before, you'll know I'm in the middle of a pretty large trip, a pretty exciting journey that consists of a lot of knitting, a lot of yarn shops, a lot of places in the world that are important to the origins of different patterns and styles of fiber arts. So stick around with me here on the channel for more of that for the next several weeks, for the next several months, as I churn out the content, edit things, and then share them with you here on YouTube. As always, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. I'm so grateful for the support you show me there and the ability for me to do things like this, to sit down and record a video, edit a video, and share it, continuing this sort of passion project of mine. If you're not already following me over on Instagram, I'm sharing more real-time updates of the trip there, and you can also find me on Ravelry, or you can email me at MakerMarkKnits. All the information is in the description box below, and as always, I'm so grateful that you're here. So thanks for joining me today. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.